The rain beat a steady rhythm against the roof of the wheelhouse of the Destiny, a 70-foot rusted blue crabber off the coast of Washington state. Martin sat in the corner of the wheelhouse, a heavy gray blanket draped over his shoulders. He wrinkled his nose as yet again the smell of fish invaded his nostrils. He'd made the mistake earlier of trying to cover his nose with his hand, but it had only made the smell stronger. He held out a hand with disgust. His hands were still wrinkled. He'd spent a full day in the water after Agaren and his cohorts had dumped him out of the plane. A plane. From the water, he'd seen the explosion as the bomb hit the factory in Edmonds. The blast had set off a small tsunami, which had shoved him farther out to sea. It was pure dumb luck that the crabber had found him. He'd managed to pull himself up onto a buoy, but only after he'd spent hours floating. Then he'd spent a cold, miserable night clinging to life on the rusted metal. The door to the wheelhouse opened. It brought with it a gust of cool air and a spray of rain and seawater. A rough man with a black stocking cap on his head, waders, and a thick raincoat stepped into the room. Captain Ernesto Flavigo gave him a bright smile. "Ah, you're still awake. I thought perhaps you might have gone below to catch some shut-eye." Martin shook his head. "No. Have you had any luck?" Ernesto nodded his head as he walked to the coffee machine and poured himself a cup. Martin held his tongue with barely concealed anger as Ernesto took a long sip. He let out a deep, contented sigh. "Yes, I've reached the Coast Guard. I told them about finding you. It appears quite a few people have been lost at sea after the events in Edmonds. The Coast Guard has been run ragged. They don't have enough people for the demand." Martin didn't give a damn about the Coast Guard and its staff shortages. "When will we be back on shore?" The man shrugged. "Another 2 hours at most, but the seas are getting choppy, so you may want to go below. It'll be safer." Martin reined in his growl. On one level, he knew the man was just trying to be polite to his unexpected guest. He and his crew of 4 had plucked him from the sea 2 hours earlier. They'd been far off the coast and had been shocked to find him on the buoy. But they'd done their best to make him comfortable. They'd given him a change of clothes and plied him with food and hot drinks to help warm him up. But they were slow men, slow-moving and slow-thinking. They were also stubborn. He could see that in the set of their shoulders and the cadence of their talk. Pushing them would only make them grow suspicious. He was lucky they believed his "I fell off a boat" story. Besides, he had no leverage here. There was nothing to hold over the man's head, at least not yet. So he bit his tongue. "I'm sure I'll be fine. What about your sat phone?" The weather had made the sat phone unusable. Either that or the missile strike in Edmonds had wiped out communication lines. He still couldn't believe that Tilda had gone through with it. He hadn't thought she had the spine for it. She'd shown him, hadn't she? Of course, he also hadn't thought Chris Garrigan and Adam Watson would kidnap him. He hadn't read their desperation correctly. Martin didn't understand that kind of response, at least not when it was linked around the well-being of another living creature. He wasn't sure what he would do if someone took his daughter,